Hello and welcome to Fortify Digital Transformation through 5G Innovation and Modern Defense, brought to you by KPMG. I'm your host, George Jackson. For DoD leaders, embracing modern digital services is more than just a technological opportunity. It's essential to fortifying systems and meeting the needs of the warfighter. Innovations like 5G, modeling and simulation, and augmented reality offer new challenges and new opportunities. We'll cover some of them today in a dispatch from ITSEC 2022, put on by the National Training Simulation Association in Orlando, Florida. What are some digital solutions helping DoD leaders maximize budgets, improve readiness, and speed up response times? Let's find out. Tyson Griffin is Director of Research and Engineering for the Naval Air Warfare Center Training Systems Division. Welcome, Tyson.
Hey, thanks, George.
His colleague, Philip Reed, is their Director of the Digital Department. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
And Vice Admiral Mike Vitale, U.S. Navy retired, is Managing Director at KPMG. Welcome.
Hey, George, thanks.
So, kick things off for us. Broad question. How do you define digital transformation at NOC-TSD?
Thanks, George, for having us and everything. So at NOC-TSD, as a part of NavAir, as a SysCom overall, our primary mission, of course, is to procure, develop, maintain, sustain training systems. So we're very much a part of the modeling simulation industry that you see here at ITSEC this right now. But you have to ask yourself, what's digital transformation mean really to modeling simulation industry itself? Because a lot of the tools and techniques that digital engineering, digital transformation includes, we actually have been utilizing for many years within the modeling simulation industry. So the idea of transformation, what does transformation really mean when you already are doing a lot of the things or have done a lot of things historically? And really what it comes down to is that it's not bucketed or siloed the way that we've utilized the tools historically in the past. It's about bringing those tools into a holistic approach of how you change your overall culture across the board. And so NOC-TSD, as a part of NavAir's initiatives to bring us into a more digital transformation age, to gain the benefits, the flexibilities, the cost ability to work with more complex systems, we're taking a holistic approach again, but we're taking both a top-down and a bottom-up. So we have a top-down, meaning that we're bringing down the various policies, techniques, plans, strategies that are being dictated either at a DoD, DON, or down to our NavAir parent command level, but also working from the teams up of how the teams are actually taking opportunities to incorporate various tools, techniques, model-based systems engineering being one of those types of tools that we can utilize to improve the way that we develop our systems, again, not in silos, but in wholes, so that we can gain the flexibilities and the speed to fleet that we're looking for within our current environment.
Phil, I'm going to pull on that word environment here. I don't want to ignore the fact that we're in Orlando. I know a lot about Harry Potter because I have twin 6-year-old daughters, and we just finished the second book. There is a connection between what you do at NOC-TSD and these theme parks that rely on a lot of simulation. Talk a little bit about this city that you're in, how it influences the work that you do for the government.
Well, that's a good question. I just, to give a little bit of background, I've been here about 4 months, new to the area. As far as working on something like this, working directly with this type of area, that's not something that I'm kind of working on yet. Tyson might actually be able to answer that one a little bit better. I'm more of the business side of things as far as being the digital director. It's essentially like a command information officer or CIO type position, whereas Tyson and team is focused more on the more external facing engineering, although there's a lot of crossover that we work with. But Tyson, you might know a little bit more about this work with Disney and others.
Yeah, well, we've traditionally not worked very much with the various entertainment industry that we have in Orlando, but as a culture and as an environment, the Orlando area, Team Orlando aspect that we have here is a very close-knit group, both for modeling simulation and also the various tools and techniques that our entertainment industry partners, not only Disney's or the Universals, but also you have EA Sports in town, you have the University of Central Florida that is very heavily involved with both digital engineering, digital entertainment, but also game industry as well as modeling simulation. And so if you take all of those components together, what we really have is we have an ecosystem of companies, we have an ecosystem of employment, we have an ecosystem of job development that really makes it possible for us to staff and also bring new innovators into our ecosystem that can then benefit, in our world, the DoD and the defense of our country.
We'll talk more, Admiral, in the second half of our program with Dr. Gumpf at Air Force Research Laboratory about that larger digital transformation conversation, but I'd love to kind of pull on that topic that both of our government guests have raised here, and that's the ecosystem idea. Private sector is a huge part of that ecosystem. How do you see that coming together in IT modernization in an area like modeling and simulation?
Yeah, so commercial companies like KPMG, because we're profit companies, we tend to have a larger market than the DoD does. So as a result, there's probably a faster advance along that technology wave. So we can bring those ideas and those capabilities back to the government. That's where our role predominantly comes in. And then we can help, figure out where to accelerate. Where can government use those opportunities to figure out things? Now, there are things that, quite frankly, government does better in some ways, and modeling and sim, is a pretty strong area for the government, because we know from a warfighting perspective, if we're not moving quickly to keep up with our competitors, we're going to lose.
Well, there's some areas that you can go after that you don't have the risk necessarily that the government has, or the security requirements and things like that can sometimes inhibit us from making some significant movements in technology advances. Yeah. So,
and that's our challenge, is to try to figure out where we can help you and how we can integrate, how we can accelerate.
What do data, what do applications, what do architecture have to do with that modeling and simulation conversation, Tyson?
In terms of data perspective purely?
Exactly.
So data is not just a buzzword today, it's a real thing. It's both because of computational power, storage power, and also in our lives, we all are using, our phones, for example, are collecting data on us all the time. We might not know it, or we might think that we've opted out, but they still are collecting the information, right? So within our military training environment, what we're starting to see is that for a lot of the things, I come from R&D perspective in my earlier career, a lot of human performance R&D, and that's a lot of data to drive artificial intelligence engines, to drive intelligent tutoring and adaptive training architectures. We're actually seeing that now, today, where we're at in 2022, we're actually able to see what we used to envision back in 2000, 2005. We're actually able to start doing that now. And we're able to do that not only because of our simulation technologies, but because of the other digital engineering technologies that come with that. Whether that's 5G that gives us the bandwidth that we need to able to move that data in real time, or the ability to, again, our phones have enough compute power compared to the computers that we most all went to school with and everything just in the palm of our hands. So because of that, data is a burgeoning activity, a burgeoning world that we can take advantage of. Taking advantage of it, we have to do so in an informed manner. Data by itself is nothing more than data. And we all hear about data, bad data in is bad data out, crap in, crap out. So what we need to do is take a holistic approach through digital engineering or other technologies that we have available today to be able to understand how and where that use of that data will most affect our sailors and our Marines and our warfighters, whether that's through training or through an operational support engine or other things.
And you're saying that from a direct area, but then as you work with other aspects of the DoD and with the Navy, as you kind of go up, you got NavAir and broader OpNav or Navy, and then the Department of Navy and the DoD, and how you have all that interoperability and integration, especially with the data piece.
You mentioned AI, Phil. What are the business questions that you and your team is asking before going from this research and development phase to the deployment phase, what sort of hurdles do you have to leap over in order to justify employing that throughout these organizations?
And when you say that, you're referring to AI. You said AI? Okay, one thing about AI is we talk about the buzzwords, right? And as far as the level of maturity of where we're at with AI, especially in, basically the business of the business, you have different levels. You have AI and machine learning, you have robotic process automation, you have all these, it's a continuum essentially. And so there's certain, we're not going to the full on, far into the continuum as far as artificial intelligence doing things at a local level, working with our business of the business efforts. But there are things like at more the lower level, it's like the robotic process automation, to where you have, really that's for a lot of actions that are just repeatable, mundane things. You could use robotic process automation to improve that. We have not really implemented that much locally, but I do know that across the Navy that's starting to get a lot more adoption in different areas. It's a cheaper way in which to make things work more efficiently in different organizations and different rationale.
Talk about the data, Admiral, that runs, as Tyson pointed out, a current through all of these efforts: 5G, artificial intelligence, augmented and virtual reality. What are some common steps that organizations need to take around their data to really harness these emerging technologies that they've outlined here?
Yeah, I think, George, that all organizations, whether they're in the Navy or DoD or the government as a whole, are all trying to figure out how to orchestrate those systems of systems to make sure that they're sucking up the data that they know they own and they have, as well as figuring out what other data they need and how do they get at that data, create that data, suck it in to give them the rest of the equation that they're trying to solve for solving a particular problem. I think the stage that most organizations in today is just trying to take all the data they know they have and figure out where is it, how do I make it coherent, put it in a similar storage environment so they can access it. There's a number of initiatives going on today, both in the Navy as well as DoD, to take advantage of that capability or to start that journey. And then it goes down into the architectures that they're going to all use to help figure out how they join all of that data, and that's the journey that everybody's on right now.
And a big piece of it is authoritative data, right?
That's
authoritative
right.
Sources, because once you have a bunch of systems, as development has occurred over years, especially in different parts of the Navy or companies, organizations in general, you just start to develop this large ecosystem and you don't necessarily have authoritative sources of data. So what that means is you might have an example. For example, I came from OpNav N1. Okay, that was the job I had before this. And way back when, we had a situation to where we had 8 different systems that had the ability for the person that was doing the transaction to put in social security number. So you can imagine the clashes that you could have once you start having problems with the data being basically in a similar format, or even in a lot of cases there were human error when you would type something in. So just simply making sure that you know what the authoritative source of a data attribute is a big deal. And that's for systems of record. But Tyson was getting more into a lot more discrete data, I think, more with the training and modeling and simulation.
Which unfortunately in many cases, the Admiral mentions the data that we think we have or that we know we have, and we don't have access to it because we have all these different data lakes living around in the world, different data owners, no central management, no central control of that in a Web3 type of activity. But unfortunately in the training world, oftentimes we don't know the data that we don't know. And it's held behind the system, it's not exposed. We could be collecting so much data, exposing that and utilizing it, and we're not, because either we didn't architect it originally in the systems, or it's an afterthought because at the time we didn't have the processing power to make utilization of it. But now we do, and now we're thinking back, oh shoot, we should have thought about that before. Exactly.
Tyson, you mentioned 5G earlier, briefly. Where does that come into the larger digital transformation effort?
Well, I think it's a major enabler moving forward, because it's a disconnected wireless environment, but it's not just the connectivity that it brings and the speed and bandwidth. but also is all of the work that's going on in that particular industry, in that capability from a cybersecurity perspective, as well as in an availability and affordability perspective. If you could think about how you could do away on a flight line, for example, of all the physical infrastructure that you might need to instrument and outfit that range or outfit that flight line for the Navy aviation environment, and you could go to a controlled, secure, high bandwidth, affordable solution, you can take those dollars and spend them back around into buying more munitions, buying more aircraft, buying more ships, having more fuel to actually do the mission. And so again, it's an enabler. It's not a total answer, but it's an enabler to the greater picture you're mentioning, George, with respect to how we go about achieving the mission requirements that we have in front of us.
Well, it's just like what you said before. It could change the operational model can change based off of new technological developments like 5G, things that you might not have thought about before, like using the data. Now that we can do something with it, or there's different ways to parse it. Now we've recognized a new requirement as technology has kind of spiraled through. So things that we didn't think had that value before, or we couldn't envision, now we can, which is part of the reason why things like digital transformation, digital engineering, and all that are becoming more and more of a focus.
Mike, as Phil and Tyson lay this out, words like affordable, efficient, sticking out to me, but at the same time, you look around here and think about the potential for better training that serves the warfighter in a really scalable way. Am I reading that right? I mean, yeah, some of these solutions, I think, from the private sector took a lot on the R&D front to develop. They may have been expensive, but if you're putting that out to millions of service members, potentially, there's an efficiency aspect to that. There's also a better training aspect to that. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, there's always going to be a trade-off between effectiveness and efficiencies, depending on where you are in the progression of that technology. But from a warfighting perspective, which is what this group here represents, it's always going to be about effectiveness first, and then efficiency second, because we never can trade off effectiveness, quite frankly.
Does that flip with the other commercial world?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I'd have to think through that a little bit, Phil.
But
No. I mean, it's a fair question. I would just say that my lens is always from a warfighter perspective, and so just having had that background and experience, I just know one thing: the things that we will never trade off in the name of money. And I think that's always the challenge that we face in the government, is trying to figure out how to take those really scarce resources and trying to maximize their capabilities.
I also think, sir, it's we want effectiveness, but what is the required level of effectiveness? Because oftentimes, especially from a digital engineering perspective, digital engineering can give us the opportunity to do testing earlier and more often, earlier in the life cycle of our development of our systems. What does that do ultimately in the end? It delivers a more capable product faster to the warfighter, but it also allows us to do the cost trade-offs along with the effectiveness trade-offs in parallel in a digital environment, rather than having to build a physical system, which takes additional time and effort and money. Ultimately, what that gets us to is maybe the 80% solution, as sometimes we all hear, but that's good enough to meet the current initial threshold of the mission, and then we can iteratively increase that capability over time, but at least we're getting the capability into the hands of the need at the time, rather than waiting longer and then giving them something that perhaps what they really needed was 6-12 months before.
The warfighter wants that 80% solution now, instead of waiting a long time to where that, it takes a lot longer to get to that 100% or 98% or whatever. So got to kind of jump on that while you have a chance.
Phil, if I could stay with you for a second, is there also a human resource aspect to this, a retention aspect? I look around and think, man, this is exciting, looks cool. Is that a good recruitment tool for the services when this modeling and simulation environment is really deployed effectively?
I would say that it's not only hey, this is a good thing, it's as we get further on in the generations that are used to this type of technology, it's a requirement to really be proactive and forward-thinking in how we do training, modeling, and simulation for recruitment. because there are all kinds of issues, even you might have been following the news even in the last year or so, of just meeting our recruitment numbers. So we definitely have to use this ability that we have to make things cool, to say, hey, this is what we're working on here, to be a recruitment tool as well. And so maybe that's a good way of connecting more with, within the Navy Recruiting Command, working more closely with other elements of the training enterprise.
I hope you forgive my use of the cusp of millennial word cool. It's already really been outdated here. So, Mike, it looked like you wanted to add something in there.
Well, I was just going to say an interesting article I read just today was, to your point, Phil, is that businesses are starting to recognize that our young kids today, I call them the kids, but are so technology savvy that we're going to hire more just coming out of high school and don't need to go to college anymore, because those skills don't require that additional education requirement, which I found interesting. Not sure I agree with it, but it is something I think that is trending.
I'd like to close, Tyson, on insights. So maybe a round robin of the group. We've talked and danced around data. We've worked in 5G. We've talked about emerging technologies. The self-actualized version of DoD involves using all of that swirling technological tools at your disposal to generate better insights for the warfighter.
Yeah, that's correct, or product. And again, in our training world, that's a training system or a training capability in the hands of an instructor or a student, at the time of need and everything. But I would say that it's about doing it right. It's not just about doing it. We have these tools and technologies, but it's about using them in an informed manner that actually gets us to that endpoint that we're looking for. Again, that's where the data comes into play. That's where the connectivity comes into play. And it's also where the transformation comes into play. Because historically, we have done those activities, but we've concentrated on one environment or one warfighter community. But in the new age, and under our current ConOps and everything, it's a system of systems effort. It's the humans combined with the material technologies to actually become an effective fighting force, a lethal fighting force. And our systems are continuing to increase in complexity. Our old ways of doing engineering, our old ways of doing logistics, our old ways of thinking about how technology affects our development and then actually implementation of those systems has to be rethought. And that's really where we need to come back around to come into an understanding of what transformation means at a cultural level, at a holistic cultural level, so that we can then be effective to compete with those peers that are coming in with a bit more nuance to it, because we've been doing it for many years. They're doing it first off. They've taken from us everything we've done right, and now they are improving upon it to do it faster and better. And if we don't then take a step back and rethink how we're doing it, then we are going to fall behind, and they're going to continue to close that gap that we keep hearing about in the news and our other activities.
Phil, what does that word insights mean to you? What do you pull out of there that's important?
Well, I think I might pivot a little bit, because I wanted to throw this out about digital transformation. A lot of times, if you think of the words, you think digital, you think it's a technology initiative, essentially. Technology obviously is a very important piece of it. The types of enterprise systems you use, and the type of hosting environments, and the type of devices and things like that, right? But it's really a lot of the big pieces about success of a transformation effort really requires good organizational change management processes, good governance, folks working together, making some good decisions, because there's a lot of resourcing decisions that you have to make. You can't just have everything that you want, right? You need to make sure you architect things well, and there's different, you can go dive deep into architecture all day long. And there's many other elements to it, including data, of course, to make a proper digital transformation occur. But I just wanted to hit that point that people hear the word digital, they hear the buzzword, they think it's whiz-bang gadgets, but you have to make sure that you get the people piece in there, because it's people, processes, and technology, not just technology.
Mike, tie a bow on this for us. What does that word insights mean to you? What did we miss?
Well, I think just from thinking about our discussion today, we often think of ourselves in the age of information, right? But I would argue we've evolved and we're now in the age of data. Okay, it's beyond information. It's about how we get and draw those insights from data that is really going to enable our future to do what Tyson talked about, to stay agile, to stay ahead of our competitors. And I'm very optimistic about that. I think we, more than enough, as you can see demonstrated here, have the ability, have the capability, but to Tyson's very good point, we have to be vigilant. We have to stay ahead, we have to be mindful, and we never can take it for granted.
Well, retired Navy Admiral Mike Vitale and the dynamic duo from NOC-TSD, Tyson Griffin, Phil Reed, thanks all for being here.
Thank you, George.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
How will defense IT leaders usher in a new era of digital services? And how will emerging tech like augmented reality, virtual reality, and 5G help pave the way? More conversations about modernization next. You're watching Fortify Digital Transformation through 5G Innovation for Modern Defense, a dispatch from ITSEC 2022 on GovExec TV.
The DoD is leading with 5G innovation to strengthen our nation's warfighting capabilities by creating a leap-ahead opportunity for a U.S. military storage command. Pairing smart warehouse applications and 5G capabilities, KPMG estimates the U.S. military can reduce labor cost by more than 55%, increase speed of gear by more than 65%, maximize warehouse storage to over 90%, and improve auditability and accountability of gear and storage to more than 98% accuracy. To achieve these game-changing outcomes, a U.S. military department selected KPMG to help build the U.S. military's first 5G smart warehouse prototype. KPMG's approach will help achieve leap-ahead capabilities, including the ability to make simulation-informed decisions and leverage intelligent decision support, actionable utilization insights, and real-time performance views. Your mission is critical, your outcomes vital. With a modular, digitalized, customizable, end-to-end solution, KPMG can help federal agencies achieve leap-ahead capabilities and game-changing outcomes by combining 5G and smart technologies to deliver an integrated global warehouse management solution. Learn how this can work. View your future KPMG 5G warehouse with a virtual reality visit.
Welcome back to Fortify Digital Transformation through 5G Innovation for Modern Defense, a dispatch from ITSEC 2022, brought to you by KPMG. I'm George Jackson. The most effective IT modernization efforts start with a willingness to embrace new technology and a solid game plan for putting it into practice. For DoD and its partners, navigating the mixed reality of the future can be a real climb. Let's give everybody a leg up with insight from the pros. Jim Gump, PhD, is Senior Technical Advisor for Enterprise Modeling, Simulation, and Analysis at the Air Force Research Laboratory. Doctor, welcome. Good to see you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And here again, Vice Admiral Mike Vitale, U.S. Navy retired and Managing Director at KPMG. Welcome back.
Thanks, George.
So, Dr. Gump, big theme of today's discussion, digital transformation. How is AFRL approaching that relatively broad topic?
Yeah, I would start with the, obviously we're at the ITSEC conference, which is really a premier modeling and simulation conference, but it's been overlaid by digital engineering and the transformation that the DoD is undertaking, as well as all of our industry partners. So there's a big push to digitize our data and actually draw off the same data source. So at the Air Force Research Lab, we've started an initiative we call the Digital War Room. And in the Digital War Room, we got some strong leadership from an SES that the commander personally named, Dr. Mike Gregg. And he's working for the commander, and so we have a top-down direction for a digital transformation of the entire enterprise. So I think what's really needed is this senior leader involvement for digital transformation and the emphasis from the senior leaders. And then the specifics are, we break digital engineering into infrastructure, which is the IT that you can work on. And then we have the models and simulation that we kind of run as tools. But we also have a lot of SysML, MBSE tools where we model the weapon systems. And it's an important process to model the weapon system and then run it. You model it in SysML, and then you run the simulation to try out our concepts. And really for AFRL, it's an effort to help our S&T researchers and then bring the researchers all the way through to where we can transition to a program of record. And so all the program offices are transitioning to digital engineering. We start in S&T doing digital engineering, and then we transition all the way through. I think another aspect is that the data is critical. So you got to both store the data to feed our models, and then we also have to have output data from the digital engineering work that's stored, indexed, and able to be retrieved. Ultimately, digital engineering is all about all the disciplines, cost people, engineers, all the different disciplines using the same authoritative source of truth. So the DoD, a lot of their direction has been digital engineering, and it's that strong authoritative source of truth at the center that everyone draws off of to make the digital transformation work. So I think it's really a tool that we're using across the laboratory, and it's all the technology directorates are involved. So it's a really whole lab effort, and it's just starting to really heat up with cloud initiatives and involving a lot of industry. So we have a lot of cloud partners that are looking at. And I guess the last facet that's challenging is you really end up with unclassified, secret, top secret, special access programs. So unfortunately, a lot of our work is very classified, and so you have to clouds at all different levels. And so you have to navigate classified models at various levels.
Sure.
So we're working through that.
Admiral, a ton of great themes we could tease out there. Generally speaking, how does what Dr. Gump lays out comport with best practices, sort of leaning forward in the private sector?
Pretty much the same. I mean, where AFRL is trying to look holistically across the whole digital ecosystem and trying to figure out how they can apply R&D to those components, as he mentioned, of that ecosystem. Commercial industry is a little more pragmatic. They're really focused on where is the opportunity that they can help, particularly from a consulting or from a products perspective. So he mentioned all the tools from a products perspective that people are trying to use. The cloud, obviously there's pretty large cloud providers across the nation. I would say the unifying theme for digital transformation, though, pretty much across every organization is the data, and trying to harness that data, figuring out what is that data, where is the data, where do we store that data, how do we then glean that data to draw the insights, the analytics off of it, so that we can figure out, are organizations working efficiently, are they working effectively, both from a mission perspective as well as from a business perspective.
That data and how it is delivered, more and more of the discussion involves 5G. How does AFRL approach 5G?
So there's a couple aspects. The bases are looking at 5G for the mobile solutions. So increasingly our engineers have to be mobile and be able to work and operate their systems, their mobile solutions, their laptops. They have to be able to operate them, and 5G is an enabler so our workforce can be increasingly mobile. I think the adding on to that, the National Security Agency has some solutions for classified that you can use over mobile, and I think that's a good program to do secure solutions in a mobile way. In addition, we're looking at this sensors directorate, one of our AFRL directorates, is looking at what's next after 5G. So they're a leader in advanced waveforms and technology, as well as our folks in Rome, New York, that are looking at communication standards and the next generation. So I think we, as a lab, can look at what's next, but industry is much ahead with 5G and all that, but we can kind of help push it forward too, that software-defined radios and all that kind of technology that we're involved in.
Admiral, where does 5G, in your view, for government fall short right now? Where is it poised to make huge advancements for the DoD community?
So, George, I don't know if I could say that they're falling short anywhere yet, because 5G is just coming into its own. You know, everybody's been on 4G. They're still essentially on 5G, although you could look at your phone, our phones, it'll say 5G, but it's relatively just a slice of the 5G band that's now incorporated into those phones. And 5G is more of an ecosystem. To truly be 5G, you have to have not only the transmission, the radios that are 5G, the distribution infrastructure, the core computing capability, as well as the end use device, all have to be present to really leverage the 5G capability. Where you're going to see that mostly is going to be in enterprise use cases. So while we as individuals tend to think of 5G as just, you know, kind of another enhancement, it's really all about the enterprise use case that will make the big difference for 5G. So like Dr. Gump is talking about, we are going to find more use cases such as on the bases or in hospitals, on campuses, in manufacturing, where we can build a 5G network that allows us to connect everything across that enterprise, draw data, and then draw insights.
One of those use cases, Mike, that you mentioned before we went on the air is a concept you called smart warehousing. Can you explain that for our audience?
Sure. So smart warehouse is just a good example of a use case. When most people think of warehousing or the most sophisticated, up-to-date warehouse, they think Amazon. And you know, Amazon's highly robotic conveyances, you know, allow for the movement of a lot of storage capability, you know, to fulfill that 5 sections, the 5 phases of a warehouse in terms of receipt, storage, inventory, issue, and shipment. So they will, that smart warehouse automates all of those phases and allows for more robotics based on a 5G network. So the 5G robots are connected to the 5G warehouse. The PLCs that direct the inventories when they come down the conveyors are connected to 5G. And the warehouse management system is operated in a cloud environment, which is also running off a 5G network. So that allows for enhanced speeds, enhanced functionality, much higher accuracies. In our case, we're looking at 98% inventory accuracy, which, you know, for the DoD, that's a big deal. Because we're trying to get that number way up.
Jim, you mentioned that you've been coming here for about 2 decades.
Yeah.
I was blown away by the size, the scope, the sophistication of this larger ITSEC program. It looks a bit more like a video gamers conference than something heavily reliant on DoD. We're in a new phase of reality, augmented, virtual, mixed reality. How do those phrases apply to the work that you're doing for AFRL?
Yeah, I think we've seen that over the years, it started out plywood cockpits, right? You had a plywood with a TV screen, and you're like, oh good, we don't have to move the cockpit around. So full motion simulators aren't needed anymore. Then we kind of moved into kind of plywood simulators, and now you see on the floor here the advances that we made in technology. So it's a mix of, you got screens, you've got projection technology, and then sometimes you have goggles or virtual reality or augmented reality. And I think the difference for our folks is that we've been at this for a while for the Air Force because we have to train our pilots. So we have heads-up displays, we have a rich environment in our jets and our aircraft. So we had to have that in our training systems, and working with the Navy as well. Over the years, Orlando has a key simulation activity, and that simulation activity is NOC-TSD and PEO-STRI, and the folks here in Orlando have been at this for a while with training simulation, and that's why we have the center of gravity for the DoD. The center of gravity is here in Orlando because we have the Navy, the Army organization, and as well as the Air Force is here with AFMS. So it's a big training presence. So we've had the conference here, and I think on the floor you'll see all their wares being brought in to show Army technology, where you have soldiers with weapons all the way through to medical and all the applications of AR, VR. For AFRL, we're trying to look at shrinking down technology so that we can do training maybe on a laptop with goggles. How can you shrink things down? My boss, General Pringle, is going to talk about that tomorrow at the Metaverse panel, and I think you'll hear more about at the Metaverse panel that idea that you are looking at augmented reality, virtual reality, just traditional screens, and how do they all fit together, different technologies, with the partners, the industry partners that are really pushing the envelope.
What do you think that balance looks like, Mike? The AR, VR balance. How can DoD, how can their partners strike the right balance there?
Well, what you're seeing is nothing more than an evolution of AR, VR evolving in the environment. DoD's been using it now for quite a while. Before it was, as Dr. Gump says, rather rudimentary.
Yeah.
They've become,
I think you used the term plywood cockpits.
They've become, the models today are phenomenally complex. The models are high fidelity. I mean, you really believe that you're sitting in the airplane today when you look at the cockpit simulations. And they're absolutely, realistic. Yeah, in terms of the ability to do things and operate. But it's still moving, that wave of using AR. So what might have been, in the old days when we first started using AR, VR to save money, which is what we're still trying to do today, and push that envelope to save more money so that we can pull more of that realism into the simulation instead of having to spend all that money in the real-time, experimentation side of the house or operations side of the house. So you're seeing a very deliberate push by the military in conferences like this one to get probably around the 80% level where they can emulate realism pretty highly, and then they can tweak it by just putting the guy in the real jet and having him fly.
Yeah, I think just to add a little bit, I think you'll see the joint simulation environment, which is a key enabler, is a Navy Air Force program it's working the 5th gen fight at PAX. They have it running today, and they have a Top Gun event where they can bring in pilots from F-35 pilots, and they can have aggressor pilots. And it runs at PAX all in a closed environment. And Ms. Kirkwood's going to talk about it at one of her panels, but I think it's a nice example of what we can do together for the 5th gen fighters, all working together at a very classified level so that it's very realistic to the training. And you can save on flight hours,
exactly.
A lot of flight hour time.
Well, in fact, it's kind of the perfect example where we still do red flag out west between Navy and Air Force F-22s against F-18s or F-35s, and now that's all in the simulator. We can put pilot to pilot, save a lot of money.
Yeah, all in a building. Yeah.
If I could pull on one of Mike's threads there, Dr. Gump, fiscal responsibility is part of what you do. You're responsible to the taxpayers. DoD needs to run efficient operations that make you responsible stewards in that respect. What does that have to do with this approach that you outlined earlier, SysML?
So the what happens traditionally, we've been building simulations, for decades, and the coders want to just jump in and start coding. The benefit to doing a SysML model first is you kind of lay out in a model the architecture, what interactions happen, and so because the complexity of systems is growing, is rapidly growing, you have to model first in like a SysML, which is a representation of how the actual system works on the battlefield. And then your simulation folks will write the code that builds the simulation. That's kind of a best practice for efficiency of the simulation development. And then I think what we're doing to save money on flight hours, we train in the cockpits. We also you can't field a system without doing a lot of simulation to say, does this make sense? And so we have technology we birthed at AFRL, and we say, well, is it really going to work, this exotic weapon or this Skyborg autonomous aircraft? Is it really going to be able to fly 4 autonomous Skyborgs controlled by 1 pilot? Does this really work? So we have human factors people, and we have researchers that look at autonomy, and it's a game changer. You run it in simulation, and then before you have to field it and go, oh, after you field it, it doesn't really work as expected. We sort it all in simulation. Then we say, yeah, this makes sense. So I think the whole community needs to do more simulation first before we actually build the systems. And it's involved, and it can be very expensive to build the simulations, but it's still, it saves money in the long run. You build the simulation now, and then you transition that simulation to the program of record, and then to the sustainers. So that's the whole idea of a digital thread. For digital engineering, they talk about digital thread. S&T start doing digital engineering, build the thread, the beginning of the thread, carry it through. Dr. Roper talked about this in Bending the Spoon and his other work. Then you bring it into, S&T, so it's research, S&T, and then it goes to program record, and then the sustainers. If you do this right, it's one digital thread. It's not like a different environment all along. So it's one digital representation you kind of carried through at the right fidelity.
To steal another of Dr. Gump's phrases, this model system is growing more complex. A lot of what you do, Admiral, is go into agencies and organizations, help them develop a strategic roadmap of sorts. Here's step 1, 2, 3 to take on. How do you simplify that for these organizations? What's that conversation look like?
Well, usually they have a requirement. The government has a requirement. They know what they're looking for, and if they can do it themselves, they certainly will. AFRL has a lot of capability internal to itself, as do most of the other labs. But it's when you want to mass produce that now, or outsource it, so to speak, and need perhaps maybe some commercial ideas that are occurring out there to kind of infuse in the way that the government's thinking. Because as you probably are aware, because of the profit-like nature of the competition or commercial world, they're oftentimes leading. In the old days, I think the government led. Right. That doesn't happen that often anymore, so commercial activities are developing new technologies, and we pull that in from our commercial side and try to help the government figure out where is the opportunity for us to help add to that roadmap and perhaps accelerate, or quantum leap, as I like to say, so that they can jump and get ahead of it.
Yeah, I think part of it is really the base, right? The investment. You have billions of users that are using 5G. I don't know about billions, but a lot of users of 5G. And so just the scale of the commercial industry versus DoD, we might buy hundreds of things, right? So I think that's part of it as well.
Exactly.
It's just a big market.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, we see that in the 5G market because, if you're a Verizon or an AT&T or a T-Mobile, and you have 3 producers of 5G radios, those producers of those 5G radios aren't going to do anything to build a new radio until one of those telcos say, I need this. And then they'll go out and build it, because they don't want to just create that market without having the person that's going to push it.
Admiral Vitale, Dr. Gump, thanks for being here.
Oh yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Appreciate it.
Sure.
To all of our speakers, thanks for joining us, and thank you, the audience, for tuning in. I hope you walk away from today's conversations with a few notes about approaching mixed reality and employing it effectively as part of your larger digital transformation efforts. For GovExec TV, I'm George Jackson. Have a great day.